Hey folks, Steve here with another Highway to the Kremlin video. This is a good look at the campaign scenario as we get rolling here. And I think this video just might be, um, we'll call it a high level video. So we're going to talk about the nature of the campaign here. In a previous video, I talked about the rules that are going to be coming into play here that we didn't have to worry about before. But now we're going to actually have to think about, well, how do we apply these things in a meaningful way that will allow us to execute the game. Now, this is a very different looking map than what we had in the Borodino scenario, right? This is at the beginning of the campaign, and you can see even right now that the French forces are arrayed here uh, in Prussia, in Poland, and if I go down far enough, uh, we do have some Austrians in the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. I shouldn't say Poland, but it's not really Poland. But there's the Austrians down there. And what's funny is, they were here. I want to say, where did we have them in the Borodina scenario? Somewhere over here. Like, they didn't move very far, they didn't move very much. And I can't imagine that, right now they're going to move a whole lot anyway. They're going to do us a whole lot of nothing probably over the life of the game. So something to think about in terms of, do we actually want to establish that Kingdom of Poland and get increased Polish reinforcement strength points? I don't know. I have to think about that. Now, otherwise, up here, everything's kind of clustered out. We have a lot more forces on the board, right? So think about, in the Borodino scenario, we were very deep in the campaign. A lot of attrition had already occurred, and we had basically, boiled down the armies to just a handful of stacks that were sort of dancing around one another along the main highway, and your tactical, operational, strategic telescope there was really all around just a handful of specific units that were going to come into contact. Here, we have a lot of a broader setup and a lot more strength points, obviously, to roll with, where we have Napoleon in the center of operations uh, over here, where they're going to be heading towards, I guess I'm going to send them over that way. But the important thing is our supply source is actually sticking out in front of us in Kovno. And I mean, I guess the Russians could actually move to engage it. I'm not sure if that makes a whole lot of sense to do, because the Russians do go first. But um, yeah, I'm not sure what to think about that. So there's a little bit of oddity there, and we're going to probably need to move our center of operations before too long. We're going to need to move it forward and deal with the consequences of that, though not catastrophically bad. We have units arrayed up here. McDonald, he could start heading up towards Riga, which is, quite a bit a ways north there. And there are Russian forces sort of throughout here that provide some layer of defense or could maneuver to stop a progression towards Riga, perhaps. We have Udno, Ney, Eugene. We have our Polish leader. We have Rainier just off camera down here. Saint-Cyr, Murat, Davout are going to be hanging out with Napoleon at the moment. And really, it's just a question like, where are we going to go? What can we do? What is our purpose here at the beginning of the campaign? And that's probably the trickiest bit here, because we have a lot of forces that are separated out. Um, and unless we want to take even more attrition, we're going to need to keep them separate. So in this campaign game, as opposed to the Borodino scenario, we're going to have to think really carefully about these smaller stacks and what we can do with them. And unfortunately, I'm a bit loath to use administrative points to issue movement commands, because, part of now the strategic layer of the game is, how do I want to conserve my logistical operations? Where do I want to focus my pen on paper time so to speak, right? It's not just about maneuvering. It's, what am I doing with my general staff, so to speak, and arranging the supply and the logistical capability, right? I could spend a lot of administrative points on movement commands, but that would, over time, degrade the effort on my logistical management and will affect attrition. So I can move a whole lot, but hurt my attrition, lose strength points basically. Um, or I could leave it to initiative die rolls, however bad that might be, and try to conserve my administrative points and really marshal my supply wagons, you could think of it, as carefully, as possible, so that I have better attrition die rolling way, way out afield. Um, and that's kind of that's something I'm going to have to balance. I could overdo it and have really great supply, but basically be not even to Smolensk before the winter really comes in and we have terrible weather, and then I'm stuck and I'm not going necessarily anywhere. And then maybe I don't win the game, perhaps. Otherwise, if I am not careful enough, I could simply drain off, too much of my force, and the Russians might be able to pick me apart in detail, as the French. So there's a balancing act to how I want to work my administrative point accrual. I certainly feel like being very diligent with my accrual early will help me, because we're going to be rolling on the better table for accruing administrative points when we're close to this side of the map, basically. And if I keep Napoleon with the center of operations, I'll have a better chance of accruing a lot more APs to last me through much of the game. Now, my cost of doing that will be a slower progression, but that might be okay. Maybe I'm going to take my time and be very diligent. And ideally, when I go for some big leap to Moscow, I'm going to be doing that. I'll still be dealing with supply attenuation, and we talked about that briefly in the previous video for the campaign rules. But that's really going to be the concern. At some point, I'm just going to stop getting administrative points, or I'll have to be very lucky to get any, and that's going to be a concern. I'm going to want to try to build up as much as I can, or look at ways to reduce my, uh, I guess, the strain on my logistics. And there's really only one good way to do that besides the default run up the highway, which is just the default situation. It's not better or worse than anything else, I guess. That's just what will happen. My option is to go for Riga. Go for Riga and then establish a clear set of depots down that main river there, and then have, my supply operating out of Drissa, which changes things across the whole map quite a bit in terms of I'm tracing from here out to Moscow. That's a much shorter path. Attenuation would be much less. And even in the attenuation calculation, we would not be dividing by 2 or multiplying. Or the number calculation there goes from a times 2 to a times 1, which will make the supply sort of supply signal, if you want to look at that, since we're using terms like attenuation, um, much stronger. So I think there's a really high desire on my part, and I don't know, if this is going to be worthwhile or not, to go for Riga. Now I could send McDonald up there. He's got a road path that he could go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. He could get up there in a couple turns. The only problem is the supply tracing up there gets a little sketchy because, well, if we did one, where's our supply? We got to clear that road, basically, and then it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 17, 18. That wouldn't quite be enough. We'd have to do something else. Like, it's not like you can just run out to Riga without basically being off your supply. And there's a weird shift that we would have to make. So I'm spending time in the video talking about this because I think it's a really important thing. If you were to just read the rules, be like, why wouldn't you go after Riga every single time? Well, it's tricky because you'd have to get out here, right? You'd kind of have to leave your main supply tracing due to the way that line of communication is traced. But you could leap out here and maybe take Riga. Let's say you're successful in taking it. Great, good job. Now, what is a bummer is you can't, you've still got most of your army down here and your supply source down here and your center of operations down here. So if you're going to try to shift your weight sort of in this direction, you'd still have to be coming down the river trying to clear these depots, at some point choosing to move your supply source and then potentially disrupting your center of operations, where you're going to have to move the center of operations somewhere along this river. So while the option is there, you have that river out there, you can get up there. It's actually going to take a lot of effort to try to make this big supply source change, um, because you'll need to have kind of this dual focus of fighting in and around here because you want to clear functionally this primary road line that goes from Vilnius up through here to near Drissa. So if we're going to do it, we're going to have to focus in two places at once, right? One, just start getting a force up this way. Two, be fighting all these Russians and kind of clearing up, ideally trying to clear a path to where you can get to Vilna, and then send a contingent up here to ideally meet your north force that may be having supply struggles and building up your depot. And then at some point, you say, I'm moving my supply source from Kovno either to Riga or waiting until you've sort of established a depot line to Drissa and then moving it to Drissa. And your supply source is kind of exposed all the way out there, but that suddenly, ideally you will have needed to move the rest of your forces up the highway, so to speak, to really gain the benefit of operating. So it's this really big logistical nightmare to try to get tracing out of Riga. It's not just like, oh, well, why wouldn't you just go get Riga and then like all your supply problems are solved? Like that's a huge commit to get your forces over there. Obviously, the Russians can try to stop you. It's not like they're, incapable of acting, right? This is not a single sided decision. Um, so, you could spend a lot of effort finagling that and maybe having a hard time of it, and that's going to set you back. So you could think of it, it is a gamble to say, I'm going to really focus on trying to knock Riga clear. And what's interesting is at the start, the Russian supply source is actually way up there, right? So it's not all the way back in Moscow. It is actually off the north side of the map. They have a supply icon up there that allows them to put their supply source marker. So that's where they're tracing their supply and where they're going to be probably doing that, I imagine, for a while. So, yeah, oddly enough, it's not simply just running down this highway road. Like we have to make a decision. Do we want to send some of our forces up there? Obviously, if you're going to be operating way beyond the main center of operations at that point, you want to be using a leader that has good initiative. You also want to be super careful of attrition. So, the really scary thing that I'm thinking about is, do I send Davu up to Riga? Do I send my best dude, my best subordinate leader in Davu with a mighty good chunk of strength points? Do I send him on a special mission to clear Riga to Drissa? He's the guy to do it. He's got benefits for attrition die rolling with his leader star. He is high initiative, so he's going to consistently be moving. Um, he would be the guy to try to make this work, I think. Um, it's just a question about whether or not we actually want to try to make it happen. I think that's the trick. So that's what's percolating in my brain right now. Is like, do I I have to kind of move everybody, so just getting everybody moving is going to be hard enough. And operating and having the initial clashes with the Russian forces that will probably want to run away, and we're not going to have much in the way to pursue them. Um, so just that by itself is its own, chess match of difficulty to get through. But to go on this great side adventure to Riga could spell the doom for Davu, and I need him. I'm going to need him in the late stages of the campaign probably to fight well. So that's a really tricky strategic thing we need to manage, and I need to think that through. Now, as I ponder the whole Riga gambit, I have to think about something else. I mentioned this a little bit ago, the Kingdom of Poland decision. So, the way this is going to work is we say, well, if we're going to reinstitute the Kingdom of Poland, we have to roll a die, and then what we roll will affect things. But here's the benefit. Um, all of the Polish reinforcements on the turn track basically get doubled. Okay. Now, over the course of the entire campaign, the Polish will get 5 replacement points across the various unit types. But that's five. Five's actually quite a bit. Doubling that brings it to 10, which is actually a huge amount. Now, there's only so many Polish units in the first place, and whether or not we'd actually get the benefit of all of this would remain to be seen because we need to really use the Polish because there's still a unit maximum that we need to uh, that we need to respect. We could maybe play around with adjusting March divisions or something to try to squeeze some out. I'm not sure the numbers actually work out for that. But if we're going to double our replacement points, we really need to be using the Polish forces a lot because whether they're taking attrition or they're taking hits in battle, like we would need to be leveraging it so that we're not getting wasted replacement points or replacement points that are on our track but we can't meaningfully use because there's not enough losses. But granted, here's the worst that could happen. We could lose the Austrians entirely. Or we get to keep the Austrians on the board, but they don't get any replacement points. Now, here's the honest truth. It looks like, excuse me, it looks like on the replacement track schedule, we get all of 2 strength points for the Austrians. Two guys. So think about that. We're gonna if we roll that, we could lose 2 but gain 5. We're going to gain 5 no matter what, and we could lose. We could end up losing 2, and we could lose the Schwarzenberg force down here. Period. Would that almost seems like a no-brainer? Is there something I'm missing there? Like this is another one of those. Hey, Riga seems like a no-brainer, but it's actually a lot more difficult than you might think. Is there any reason not to try to make this work? And establish the Kingdom of Poland, maybe we should do that. I would think there's some other repercussion, but this seems like a very good idea in my mind. I don't expect the Austrians to do much. We're talking about a leader. Schwarzenberg has a 2 initiative, which means he's not going to activate very much. He's not necessarily going to be in good line of communication for a lot of the game, at least historically. We know this is hindsight, but we know the Austrians were not really committed to the campaign with the secret dealings in the background with Russia. So I'm definitely thinking about choosing to get the Kingdom of Poland going so that we can help to reinforce parts of our Grand Army that are actually going to help us because we've got a good leader in Poniatowski. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so I apologize to those with Polish origins on watching the video. Uh, Poniatowski, I don't know. He's actually a good leader. Like he's good. He has a 4 initiative. That's pretty good. And he's got a command span of 5, which is just fine. And his subordinate value is 2. So he can actually do a lot of work for us. And if we can get him Polish troops, he could help us quite a bit. So that's another thing I'm going to have to ponder as we get started. So, are we doing Riga? I don't know. Are we going to do the Kingdom of Poland? I think there's a strong advantage to doing that. So, from the French perspective, there's going to be a lot to do here. Again, we're going to head up north potentially. We've got to swing some of our forces here and engage. Ideally, right, historically, what the French wanted to do was to keep Bagration and Barclay from coordinating. So what would be lovely is if we somehow, try to run through here and beat Bagration out this way, or like got in between them and created a problem, while maybe Napoleon, Ney, Murat are fighting Barclay around here and keeping them separated. And we would obviously just love to try to maybe get a force surrounded uh, and crush a force permanently. Force elimination is going to be really important over the course of the campaign. We only ended up seeing that happen in the late stages of the Borodino scenario because units were just being rubbed down to the nubs and losing their last strength points. But it's going to be really important if we can, especially with these Russian forces spread out, if we could try to nail them down somehow. I don't know exactly how that's going to come to pass, but if we could and eliminate some of them, what we want to do is get rid of those containers, the combat units themselves that hold strength points. If we can eliminate those over the life of the campaign, that means that the Russians could start to, top off and not be able to leverage their manpower because the organizational structure, right, the command staff that are the combat units themselves as the containers of strength points, they won't have enough capacity to leverage the Russian manpower. So that's a lovely thing for us to try to achieve if we could do it. I'm not sure we're going to be able to. So at this point in the campaign, there's just a lot out there. It's going to be really hard to nail any particular force down, but we're going to have to work that through. Now, let's change the camera angle and pretend I'm, the Russian sided player for a second, right? Now, for the Russians, it's really hard to know what to do here. Historically, the Russians tended to just drift back. There was not a major engagement. There were minor engagements, but not a major engagement until Smolensk. So, I mean, I don't see a reason not to do that as well, and basically just aim to let attrition be a big factor, try to concentrate our forces as best we can, even if that means giving up a lot of ground. If we see, let's say that the French were aiming to get on the Riga supply path, right? Strategically, that affects that attrition. Like if we're going to use attrition, the weather, and land as a part of our army, hurting the French more than our troops are, well, getting into Riga will help to hinder our allies in our landmass and weather and attrition. And so we probably do want to have, a strong effort to stop a French seizure of the river line and that supply, path, the barges that would keep the French army supplied. Again, I still don't know that the French have the sea lift necessary to make this a realistic thing, but I don't know. That's something I need to read more about, I guess. Like, I don't know where I would go to read about that. Where do they have enough ships that could have traveled in the North Sea to not the North, well, I guess the North Sea and then the Baltic to make this real? I just don't know. We'll worry about that. We'll play the game as is. So that's kind of the thought process. Yeah, we do want Bagration and Barclay to be able to support each other, even if they can't be buddies because they've got that personality conflict. At least being together allows for the potential for localized manpower superiority, which could be helpful. Or, maybe if I can opportunistically catch some French forces in a bad situation and maybe knock them out. One of the things I need to look at, like how conceivable is it to surround a force? Like ultimately, those with a pursuit desire are going to get away from a pitched battle, especially with the override rule that exists. But like, what would it take to, if you were keeping close to the enemy and you got into these areas where there's a lot of roads converging, could you try to swing a contingent with a major general or something out around an enemy, right? And think how big these hexes are. We don't get stopped by being adjacent to the enemy. Could creep out behind somebody, and be in their rear with some major generals, basically closing off a retreat path. And, in those situations, you almost have to fight a pitched battle that could go poorly, or you really can't choose pursuit because you've got nowhere to run to. And we didn't have enough forces in being to really do that convincingly in the Borodino scenario. I wonder if it's feasible to do that here in the campaign at some point. The Russians are going to try to make sure to never be in that situation, obviously, but if they're forgetful, like if they don't pull back far enough when they move, that could be a problem, right? If the French push and use all their movement points and use the roads and get in behind you, you could be in trouble. So the Russians are going to have to, I think, a lot of the time just fall back their full movement. I think a lot of the time, because there's not going to be that many great options to stand and fight, nor would we want to. We would want to seek to fight the French on as much even terms or advantage terms as we could manage. And a lot of the time, if we want to keep to the strategies that work, avoid fighting Napoleon and fight his subordinates instead. If you think about the the wars in 1813, 1814, same mentality, right? Don't fight where Napoleon is, fight elsewhere. Maybe that's what we should be trying to do as the Russians. I think they sort of did that historically anyway, or at least they tried to watch how they engaged. That's about as much strategy as I can think of. The Russians also have to manage their administrative points, but I don't think that the pressure is on them quite the same way that it is for the French. We're still going to have to pay attention to things like attenuation or tracing and making sure that like we're in good shape. But we can always fall back to a city or a big town and forage if we had to. We're much closer in terms of being able to just run backward into some safe place to get forage for our attrition die rolls. The French can maybe do that too, but they're going to have they're going to be too busy trying to establish depots and dropping garrisons where we can kind of just fall back as we need to. Now, there's one other thing I have to consider, and this is really a how much pain of complexity do I wish to inflict upon myself, which is that so far I've not played with vedettes, and because this is a solitaire game, not opposed, vedettes haven't really been meaningful. Now, I am going to play with partisans because partisans can affect lines of communication and all of that good stuff. But vedettes really don't do much in a game that does not involve fog of war. Now, if I were playing an opposed game, it would certainly matter quite a bit. You would use vedettes to scout out ahead, see what the enemy has at a given stack, and try to understand like where is the concentration of enemy force, um, especially if you're trying to target a particular stack to attack. So all very important stuff. And this would matter even early on because much of the Russian strength point total is actually really spread out. In some cases, there may only be 4 to 6 strength points, even with a big important leader like Barclay. So being able to know where the enemy is and where you want to focus effort could be a really big deal in an opposed game. And you could sort of keep track of things, as you're playing your opponent by saying, hey, I revealed that counter. I know that it's Barclay. Now he's moved around a bit, but I know Barclay's somewhere over in this area. All that kind of normal fog of war tension that games from OSG tend to include when you can do it. But of course, I've been playing solitaire. That's a problem. Well, there is one option at my disposal that would allow me to bring vedettes back onto the board and would provide me a bit more uncertainty in what's happening on the map. Could have some really bizarre events and less certainty than I've enjoyed up to this point. And that sounds interesting. At some point in the past, Mark Herman developed some maybe unofficial solitaire rules for the Napoleon at Bay system, which is still basically the campaigns of Napoleon system. And I have it here. Now, I found this. I'm trying to remember where exactly I found it. I'm not sure where the official place to grab this is, but I did find it and I downloaded it. And basically, the way that this works is you are playing the game face up invisible, but anytime that you use even, say, a vedette or some other force and you get into the Zoc. I'm summarizing here, right? You might want to pause it and actually read the text if you're really interested in all of this. But basically, the way it works is you move a force next to an opponent, and then depending on the composition of that force, does it include a vedette? Does it have cavalry, etc.? You're going to roll a die to see if the unit that you arrived adjacent to is in fact that unit, or is it actually a different stack nearby. And so playing a 5x series game, the distance we would use is 3 hexes. And that substitution would occur based on the force that is closest to the one that you're investigating. So it could be, as you kind of read through the text there and understand what's going on, what could happen is that, let's say I moved up against Barclay. Well, it could be for whatever reason, like as we look at it, we say, oh well, we roll a die, and it turns out that it's not Barclay; it's actually Major General 4, and so we would swap their places, and let's say Napoleon would in fact be attacking Major General number 4 instead. So what we see on the map is not necessarily what's actually going on. And I think that's really interesting. It reminds me, I swear, when I came up with these rules for Silver Bayonet, I didn't know about this from Mark Herman. It reminds me a lot of some solitaire rules that I developed for Silver Bayonet that you can go to the Silver Bayonet Board Game Geek page and find, where you kind of have this potential that what you see on the map is not actually what you see on the map, or what's there is not actually there. And it's a very similar idea that Mark Herman's developed here. So we'll say the parallel development, there's this idea that must occur to people here, that you can create some circumstances that allow for uh, a different configuration, and that helps solitaire play. I think this is really interesting, guys. So I think I might try to play with this. What this will mean for me is I'm going to need to deploy vedettes on the board. And the French have a vedette pool of 20, um, which is quite a lot. And I can only actually deploy, what I have core for. But there's certainly a lot of vedettes on the map. You can put up to 2 vedettes with starting forces, and the Russians have a Cossack equivalent pool of 5. Now, I would intend to give Platov his special unit by getting 5 Cossacks together, but this gives us a reason to actually put vedettes on the map. And again, this is where you can have units kind of poof into existence, maybe where you didn't expect them to be. This does add a lot more complexity for me to finagle here, because it requires me like reassessing, not just bringing the vedette rules back into the game and needing to make sure that I do the vedette stuff properly, but now adds this additional funky little bit here. But I think it would do a lot to making it more interesting for me as a solitaire exercise, because it's less certain. Like I always know if I'm going to go repulse a force. That helped, eliminate a lot of Russians in the Borodino campaign, but that was certainty that you really would never have in a game like this. Not really. You'd have some good idea of what you were going to be able to achieve, maybe. So I really like the idea of playing with this, and I'm probably going to aim to do it. And so what this will really mean is, yes, I will have vedettes on the board if I do follow through here, and I'll be using them to try to identify the enemy and fix them, not necessarily try to ID them, because I'm going to know that Bagration is, or Barclay or Bagration is someplace. But those vedettes will help make sure that it is indeed Barclay there, and not the potential for it to be swapped with something else. And it will be important to try to fix those enemy positions before I engage, or as I would seek to engage. But the order of operations will get tricky, where it will be like, well, if I go and check it out with a vedette, will that vedette get smooshed in the combat and have to be recycled through? And there's all that kind of stuff that's going to have to play into things that I've been able to largely ignore up to this point. But given vedettes can't interrupt lines of communication, they are going to be operating, floating around, and they really have to stay within dispatch distance of a depot or the center of operations. So it's not as though we're going to have vedettes like flying all over the map. It is going to be really a bubble of vedettes operating around our main forces, and that will look a little bit more like a real game that you would be playing. Again, the big difference is I'm playing with the counters, face up rather than face down, which is how an opposed game will go. So we'll give that a shot, guys. So that's the thought on the campaign strategy here. That we are going to have to think about Riga. We're going to have to think about um, how we're going to operate in the near term with our forces on the map. Can we eliminate Russians before they have a chance to consolidate? They're going to have the benefit of good ability to run away. So I don't imagine it's going to happen a lot. And whether or not we're going to embolden the Polish forces, I think we're going to end up doing that because I don't see a reason not to. There is a chance that we'll completely lose Schwarzenberg's stack, but I don't know that I care that much. That might be perfectly fine and doable. So we'll look at that, guys, at the outbreak of the next video or at the start of the next video. We're going to be playing the campaign. Again, I'm probably going to fit multiple turns into single videos. You're not going to see everything as a counter by counter movement sort of coverage here. All the lessons learned are going to go into the gameplay. The vedette stuff's going to go into the gameplay. Is it possible I'm going to make mistakes still after all of this? Sure. But it'll be a little less easy to spot, maybe. And to be honest, there'll be cases where if somebody asks me a question, I may not be able to tell you for sure why something is in some state or in a particular location. There's going to be a lot more of, technical fog of war going into place now with the vedette. So as I play, if some really interesting things come out of that vedette play, like the substituting of stacks that lead to uncertain conditions, like a force attacking a Russian force or vice versa, much bigger than we thought, that will make for interesting narrative as we talk through the game. So we'll do it up, guys. Thanks for watching this one. Again, this is just strategic thoughts on the campaign. We'll get into the gameplay next video. So take care, keep gaming.